Today we're going to talk about the difference between dye and paint. Stay tuned. For custom sneakers, clothes, and collectibles like Supreme, check out sneakerpickers.com. If you're watching this, you probably don't have a lot of experience with finishing shoes, leather, clothing, or anything like that. I'm just going to talk about the difference between dye and the difference between paint. Now this pretty much goes for anything. If you're talking about markers, if you're talking about paint for shoes, for leather, if you're talking about dye for clothing, if you're talking about dye for leather, it really doesn't matter. It really goes for anything that's dye or that's paint. Okay, so what's a dye? Dye is going to have your pigment in it, right? But the pigment's going to be dissolved in a solvent. Okay, they use all different sorts of solvents. Solvent could be anything from water, if it's a water-based dye, to acetone, if it's a harsh dye. I mean, honestly, I don't know what they're using for dye solvents, but dye is going to be pigment and solvent. So paint, on the other hand, you're going to have pigment, but along with that pigment, you're going to have some sort of medium, some sort of binders that are going to bind that pigment up with some solvent as well. This way, when the solvent evaporates, you have left behind those binders and the pigment. That's what gets it to stick. That's what gives you layers, is that medium, that binder medium. Depending on what kind of paint it is, there's all different types of binder mediums. You know, you have your oil-based paints, you have your water-based paints, you have acrylics, you know, there's all sorts of different types. But if you just want to know what the difference between dye and paint, there it is. Dye has pigments that are mixed with the solvent. Paint has pigments with some sort of medium and a solvent. One sticks, creates layers. One is meant to soak into whatever you're putting it on and actually dye it. Now, what else is the difference between dye and paint? Dye is usually less resistant to UV light, is where paint normally has more of a resilient to UV light. They put additives in it to resist the UV light. Paint is putting a coating on something. So now when we're working with these leather shoes, we're actually putting a coating on it. Where Angelus paints come into effect, and why they're made for leather specifically, is how flexible it is. So you can build up that coating, you can flex that leather, and you're not going to get cracks in it. It's going to move with the leather. Angelus paint sort of kind of feels like a dye, especially when you thin it down. It can actually work like a dye. You can use the fabric softener, and you can use it on fabric, and it'll absorb into it just like a dye. It does have similar characteristics, but you have to remember there is some sort of binder medium in there as well. Alright, what exactly they use, I'm not too sure. It is what it is. I know Angelus paints works very well. I know dye works very well. I know Angelus dyes work very well. All dependent on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to dye, what you're trying to paint. They all have their own specific applications. I use it all. Mostly for shoe customization, I'm using paint, but in some cases I am using dye. Let me show you two different instances, how they came out and what they look like. One's dyed and one's painted. On these Sports Illustrateds, we have this embroidered swish. On this pair here, I decided to try the dye. I used the RIT dye. Now these here, they're just fabrics, strings of fabric that are woven back and forth a whole lot as like an embossing. So what I did was I took a brush, dipped it in dye, and just dipped it on there, and it spread out through that stitching, right? I let it absorb. I had to do a couple coats. I had to let it dry. I hit it with the air dryer. I let it set a few days, and then I put an acrylic finisher right over it just to be sure that dye's locked in. We're not going to have any issues. It can clean easily if it gets dirty. So that's the dye process. Doesn't look too bad now, does it? And let me show you a pair that was used with the paint process. Right, now that swish was painted. What I did was I took the Angelus paint, I mixed it with some Fabric Soft, this is the fabric medium additive, mixed it with that black paint, put it on those embossed threading, right? And I also did the outline here, because now we're using the paint, so I can actually put a coating on that plastic piece. So we painted that up, we did it all, and then I put an acrylic finisher over that as well, just a clear finisher. And let me tell you, come out beautiful. Now what's gonna be the difference? You know what? They both did the same job. They both looked beautiful. Side by side, you tell me. The one that was dyed come out a little bit more flat looking before I put the finisher on it. In all fairness, I did use the regular acrylic finisher that does have like a semi-gloss to it. Maybe you could use a matte finisher and get like a matte finish to that. But what I didn't want to do, see that outside edge that was naturally red, I didn't want to hit that anymore with black, so the dye worked really, really good. That's why I chose the dye there. This way it spread out through the fibers. I didn't have to get close to that edge, and when it was time to just put a red paint stripe around that swish, I could just paint one red paint stripe and I was done. So it saved me some time there. You know what, either one worked. I think either one's gonna last. I think either one looks great. It just all depends on your application. If you ever have any questions, you can just comment below. You could also go in the description. I have all sorts of ways to get a hold of me. Don't forget to go check out sneakerpickers.com. That's where we're gonna be putting all these $3,000 worth of custom shoes for sale. It's getting exciting. We're getting close to getting some done. Follow me through the series. We're gonna check out all the different Angelus colors I have. I don't have that many. I do have a few, and the ones I do have, we're gonna review. And I'm also gonna show you some tips and tricks, step by step, what I've been doing. Maybe some different tricks that if you haven't done this before, it would really, really come in handy, so you learn now and not later. I know there's some things that I learned from doing custom shoes over a certain period of time that I would love to pass on to you guys. So stay tuned. It's the Angelus leather paint series. Go look for my videos. I'm going to make a playlist, all right? That's all I have for today. Joe Kyser over and out. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good whatever it is, wherever you guys are at. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.